My brother Mark always had a way of twisting words, of painting himself as the favored son, the true heir to our grandfather's legacy. "You were never worthy of our grandfather's name," he'd sneer, dismissing my quiet years of devotion. After Grandpa passed, Mark made sure everyone believed I was a mere afterthought, undeserving of anything. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Grandpa had left behind a different kind of truth, hidden in plain sight, in an old photograph that would soon expose everything. I remember standing in the living room, the scent of lilies and stale grief still clinging to the air, just days after we'd laid Grandpa Elias to rest. Mark, ever the showman, cleared his throat. He held up a hand, silencing the murmurs of our extended family. His voice boomed, authoritative, as he announced his intentions. "As the eldest grandchild, and the one most dedicated to Grandpa's vision," he began, his eyes sweeping over the room, carefully avoiding mine, "I will be taking over the family business and managing Grandpa's estate." A dismissive flick of his wrist, almost imperceptible, was all the acknowledgement I received. It was a physical gesture that mirrored years of emotional neglect, a constant undermining of my presence. The room fell silent, and I felt the familiar burn of invisibility, a pain that had etched itself deep into my heart over decades. Grandpa Elias had been my anchor, my confidant. My parents, always busy, always chasing some fleeting success, often left me in his care. Mark, being older and more boisterous, was the one who effortlessly commanded their attention. He was the golden child, the one destined for greatness, while I was simply there. I recall countless afternoons spent with Grandpa in his dusty study, listening to his stories, helping him tend to his rose garden, sharing quiet moments that felt more real than any lavish birthday party Mark ever had. I nurtured his dreams, listened to his worries, learned about his life, not with grand gestures, but with consistent, unwavering presence. I made him tea, read him books when his eyes grew tired, and simply sat with him when he felt lonely. It was a silent pact, a bond forged in shared solitude. My sacrifice was my time, my youth, my own aspirations often pushed aside to be there for him. And now, in this crowded room, surrounded by faces that once offered comfort, I felt utterly alone, my devotion dismissed as mere obedience. The injustice stung, a raw wound reopened. I heard Aunt Sarah whisper, "Poor Elena, always so quiet. Mark will take good care of everything, I'm sure." My cousin nodded in agreement, their pity a fresh layer of humiliation. Mark, meanwhile, soaked it all in, basking in the glow of assumed authority. He spoke of strategic plans for the business, of modernizing Grandpa's legacy, using language that sounded impressive but utterly devoid of the warmth and heart Grandpa had poured into his work. He talked about my inheritance, my responsibilities, as if I didn't exist, as if I hadn't spent more time understanding Grandpa's quiet wishes than he ever had. I watched him, a knot tightening in my stomach. What they didn't know was that the very quietness they misinterpreted as weakness was, in fact, the space where Grandpa had planted his truest intentions. Days turned into weeks, each one a fresh assault on my dignity. Mark, with his carefully cultivated charm, ensured that every family discussion, every gathering, reinforced his narrative. He would subtly imply that I was too sensitive, too unworldly to handle the complexities of the estate. "Elena means well, bless her heart," he'd say with a patronizing smile. "But she's always been more of a dreamer than a doer." I remember one evening at a family dinner he hosted, he even went so far as to suggest I move out of the small cottage on the estate grounds, the very place I had lived for years to be close to Grandpa. "It's simply not practical, Elena," he'd announced, pushing a plate of untouched food in front of me. "The family needs the main house to be a central hub. We'll find you a lovely apartment in town, something more manageable." The offer felt like a gilded cage, a polite eviction designed to further isolate me, to erase my connection to Grandpa's home. My own needs, my own quiet contributions were systematically erased. I remember the pain of watching him begin to sort through Grandpa's study, a place that felt more sacred than any church. He'd toss aside books I knew Grandpa cherished, dismiss old photographs with a wave of his hand. "Sentimentality won't pay the bills," he'd declare, often to a chorus of nods from our more practical relatives. I felt a growing sense of desperation, a fierce need to protect Grandpa's memory from Mark's cold, calculating grasp. What they didn't realize was that Grandpa was a man who understood the value of sentiment, the power of a hidden truth. One rainy afternoon, I found myself drawn to Grandpa's study, a quiet rebellion against Mark's decree that only he should manage its contents. The room felt heavy with memory, the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco a comforting embrace. Mark had left it in a state of disarray, boxes half-packed, papers scattered. I started to meticulously organize, to re-shelve the books he'd carelessly discarded, to place the trinkets he deemed worthless back in their rightful spots. It was a small act of devotion, a way to connect with Grandpa, to feel his presence amidst the chaos Mark had created. As I gently cleaned out a drawer in his old mahogany desk, a drawer Mark had probably barely glanced at, my fingers brushed against something thin and stiff. I pulled it out. It was a faded photograph, slightly curled at the edges. It was a picture of me, much younger, probably 10 or 11, sitting on Grandpa's lap in his rose garden. I was clutching a storybook, my face alight with laughter, while Grandpa smiled down at me, his eyes full of warmth. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over me, a pang of longing for those simpler times. Mark had always detested this particular photo, calling it saccharine or too sentimental. He preferred the more formal portraits, the ones where Grandpa looked like the formidable businessman he was. But this photo, this quiet moment between a girl and her grandfather, was the true essence of our bond. I traced the outlines of our faces, a lump forming in my throat. Then I noticed something. On the back of the photograph, almost invisible against the sepia tones, was a curious, almost microscopic, handwritten note. It was in Grandpa's distinctive, elegant script, so faint I had to hold it up to the light, tilting it just so to catch the faded ink. It wasn't a casual note, no, "To my dearest Elena," or "A cherished memory." It was a series of seemingly random letters and numbers, intertwined with a small, familiar symbol, a rose, etched with meticulous detail. I had seen that rose before, but where? The puzzle piece clicked into place, not fully, but with a tantalizing promise. I knew in that moment that this was no accident. Grandpa had been a man of careful intentions. What they didn't know was that this seemingly innocent family photo held a secret, a blueprint to his true legacy. I stayed quiet, clutching the photograph, my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and excitement. I knew if Mark found out, he would dismiss it as another one of my imaginings, another piece of my emotional baggage. He would try to take it, to analyze it, to twist its meaning to fit his narrative. But this was mine. This was Grandpa's message, meant only for me. I tucked the photo deep inside my oldest, most cherished copy of The Secret Garden, a book Grandpa had given me when I was a child. It was a place I knew Mark would never think to look, a sanctuary for hidden truths. I knew I needed to decipher this, but I didn't know where to start. This fictional narrative, visualized through AI-generated scenes, explores the depths of sibling rivalry and the surprising power of a hidden clue to reveal truth. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and anxious days. I tried to make sense of the inscription, but it was just a jumble. I even showed it to my old neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, elderly woman who had known Grandpa for years. She squinted at it through her thick glasses. "Looks like some kind of code, dear." She'd murmured, "Your grandpa was a clever man, always loved a good riddle." Her words, though not providing an answer, ignited a flicker of hope. Grandpa had always been fond of puzzles and cryptograms, a trait he'd passed down to me. Mark, on the other hand, had no patience for such things. He preferred directness, the clarity of a balance sheet. This was a puzzle only I could solve. I felt a profound sense of isolation. Mark's relentless undermining had convinced most of our relatives that I was indeed fragile, prone to flights of fancy. They smiled at me with pity, offered platitudes, but never truly listened. It was a subtle, insidious form of psychological manipulation, isolating me from potential allies. My aunt once told me with a sigh, "You should just let Mark handle everything, Elena. It's too much for you." Their words, meant as comfort, only deepened my despair. I felt my voice shrinking, my confidence eroding under the constant barrage of their judgment. I missed Grandpa so terribly, his quiet strength, his unwavering belief in me. It was at this lowest point, when I felt truly lost, that a memory surfaced. I remembered a conversation with Grandpa years ago, when I was a teenager. We were in his study, and he was teaching me about his antique stamp collection. He'd pointed to a rare stamp, one with a tiny, almost invisible mark. "Sometimes, Elena," he'd said, his eyes twinkling, "the most important truths are hidden in plain sight, disguised as something else. You just need the right key to unlock them." He had then shown me a trick, a way to reveal a secret message on an old family crest using a specific type of light. The key, he explained, was often tied to something personal, something only the intended recipient would understand. And then it clicked. The rose. The rose was the key. Grandpa had a small, exquisite silver locket he always wore, a family heirloom passed down through generations. On the back of the locket was a miniature, intricately carved rose, identical to the one on the photograph. He'd always told me it was a symbol of enduring love, a secret language between generations. The locket was one of the few things Mark hadn't claimed as his own, dismissing it as old-fashioned trinket, but I remembered seeing it in his jewelry box after he had passed. I waited until everyone was out of the house, Mark at a meeting, the relatives gone for the day. My hands trembled as I carefully retrieved the locket from Grandpa's jewelry box. It was cool and smooth in my palm, a tangible link to him. I rushed back to my cottage, to the sanctuary of my room. With the photograph laid out on my desk and the locket in hand, I stared at the enigmatic inscription. I remembered Grandpa showing me how the locket contained a tiny magnifying glass, a hidden feature only he'd ever used. What they didn't know was that this seemingly simple piece of jewelry was about to become the tool of revelation. With the tiny magnifying glass from the locket, the faint inscription on the back of the photograph suddenly sprang to life, the letters and numbers no longer random, but forming a coherent sequence. It was an address, specifically the address of a small, discreet law firm in the next town over, one I'd never heard Grandpa mention. Beneath the address, in even smaller script, were the words, "Ask for Mr. Davies. Tell him the rose led you here." The hairs on my arms stood up. It was a cold, clear, sunny Tuesday morning when I walked into the modest office of Davies and Associates. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman with warm eyes, greeted me. "I'm Elena," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "The rose led me here." Her eyes widened imperceptibly, and she nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "He's been expecting you, dear, for a very long time." Mr. Davies was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He sat me down, offering me a cup of tea. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Elena," he began, his voice soft. He was also a man who understood human nature, especially sibling rivalry. He explained that Grandpa Elias, anticipating potential disputes and wanting to protect my future, had established a trust fund years ago, a secret trust fund designed to be activated only upon his passing. He wanted to ensure that my quiet devotion, my steadfast presence, would not go unrecognized or unrewarded. Mark's tendency to dominate and manipulate had not gone unnoticed by Grandpa. Mr. Davies slid a document across the polished mahogany table. It was a meticulously drafted trust agreement, dated almost 15 years prior, stipulating a substantial portion of Grandpa's liquid assets to be held in a separate account for me, managed independently of the main estate. This fund, Mr. Davies explained, was specifically designed to provide you with financial security and the means to pursue your own dreams, separate from the family business, which your grandfather knew Mark would naturally gravitate towards. He explained that Grandpa wanted me to have the freedom to choose my own path, unburdened by the family's expectations or Mark's control. What they didn't know was that Grandpa had always seen me, truly seen me, and had quietly ensured my dignity long before his final days. My eyes welled up. It wasn't just about the money, though the sum was far beyond anything I had ever imagined. It was the profound validation, the knowledge that Grandpa had believed in me, had valued me, had seen my quiet strength when no one else did. He had not only ensured my financial security, but also protected my emotional well-being from the very sibling rivalry that was now unfolding. Mr. Davies also revealed that the trust included a clause, a small but powerful detail. The cottage, my home, was explicitly listed as part of this trust, ensuring my permanent residence there, safe from Mark's attempts to displace me. The next family meeting was held in the very living room where Mark had publicly announced his takeover. He sat at the head of the table, an arrogant smirk on his face, ready to deliver another pronouncement. But this time, Mr. Davies was there, sitting beside me. As Mark began to speak, to once again outline his vision for Grandpa's legacy, Mr. Davies gently cleared his throat. "Mark," he interrupted, his voice calm but firm, "there's an important matter we need to discuss regarding your grandfather's estate, specifically concerning Elena." The atmosphere in the room shifted. A subtle ripple of unease replacing the usual placid acceptance of Mark's authority. Mark bristled, his face darkening. "What is it, Mr. Davies? Elena has no claim to the business, as we've all agreed." Mr. Davies simply smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. He produced the trust document, carefully unrolling it on the table. The silence in the room was deafening as he began to read, his voice clear and unwavering, detailing the trust fund, the cottage, and Grandpa's specific instructions. The faces around the table, once filled with pity or blind acceptance, now shifted through a spectrum of emotions: surprise, confusion, and finally, dawning realization. Mark's face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of disbelief, then fury. He slammed his fist on the table. "This is a fraud! Elena, what have you done? You manipulated him!" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. But Mr. Davies simply presented the faded photograph, the locket, and explained the intricate code, the years of planning. He explained how Grandpa, fearing exactly this type of outburst, had taken every precaution to ensure his true wishes were carried out, bypassing any attempts at undue influence. The truth, painstakingly revealed, was undeniable. The evidence was irrefutable, the legal documents solid. Mark's deceit was exposed, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. The room was no longer filled with pity for me, but with uncomfortable silence for him. His authority, his carefully cultivated image as the golden child, shattered into 1,000 pieces. I looked at him, not with triumph, but with a quiet sense of peace. The dignity that had been stripped from me piece by piece was finally restored. It was a restoration not of wealth but of worth. I lost my grandfather that year, but I did not lose myself. I had always been worthy of his name, not because of what I would inherit, but because of the love and devotion we shared. His final act was not one of favoritism, but of fairness, a quiet testament to the person he knew me to be. The old photograph, a simple snapshot of a shared moment, had become the unexpected key to unlocking a legacy far richer than any material inheritance. It was a legacy of love, trust, and the profound wisdom of a grandfather who truly saw his granddaughter. What would you have done in her place, feeling isolated and undermined? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more emotional family stories about betrayal, secrets, dignity,